Before we get started on the crown mason jar painting, I just want to show you the reference photo that I took, and then here's our drawing on the watercolor painting paper. So for the things that I'm going to focus on first, or things that I want to just bring to your attention, are the highlights on the glass, and then all the little white marks within the crown and the actual word crown, and the lighter sections within the lid and the shadows. So I'm just trying to get the placement of the dark colors and the light colors in this photo. So when we begin, we paint from light to dark, and then the medium tones, and then we finesse after. So these 4 jars are placed on a shelf in my cupboard. So this is the side wall of the cupboard, obviously the shelf, and then the back wall. I think to start, I'm gonna go with the lids. These jars contain barley, red kidney beans, and black beans. So those are the contents of the jars, just in case you're wondering. If you do this painting, that's what they are. But in your painting, it could be jelly beans, pasta, whatever your little heart desires. This is my setup to get started for painting. I have 2 water jars. I start with using Davy's Gray on all the lids, just covering the whole lids, and then I let it dry. And then I bounce back with Davy's Gray and neutral tint. And I'm focused on the 3rd jar in. I paint it a little bit darker to start with because it is in the shadow as per the reference photo. And while I'm painting, I go back and forth comparing my reference photo to each of the details that I'm painting. Now you can see from the side angle my motions with the paintbrush. It's a watery consistency of Davy's Gray and neutral tints. And I work on each jar one at a time just to let the other ones dry, so then I can further the details along. I love watercolor because if you put it too dark, you can always lift off the paint and then let it dry and then put in the details that you would like to put in. Now this is just a repeat of the side view, but from overhead, just for your reference. In a moment, I'm going to finish this layer on the lids and start on the jars. Jar 1, I mixed a light green using yellow ochre and ultramarine blue to fill in the barley on jar 1 and jar 2. Jar 3, I did a ultramarine blue wet on wet technique with burnt Sierra light. And I did the same for the kidney beans on jar 2. And you'll notice when I paint the beans on jar 2, I do lift the paint to create some of the highlights that are on the beans. So yellow, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna light, and then I lift the paint to show the highlights. Now we're going to let that dry. On jar 1, I'm using yellow ochre, and I'm filling in the barley. And to make a little green tint, I'm adding a little bit of ultramarine blue. I'm working on the sea, and I'm filling in some the deeper colors in a medium tone where the barley overlay each other and the shadows. Here's a side view. Now while jar 1 dries, I'm going to work on the gray shadowing of jar number 2 in the crown. There's like a double cross on the crown. It's like a gray mixture of neutral tint and the use of a watery Davies gray. And I'm going to be using the green that I made with the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna light. And then that's the overlap for the barley and the edge of the jar. Now jar number 3, I'm just going over again with burnt sienna light. When you darken the 3rd jar, it really makes the 2 jars to the left and the right of it pop. I really love that effect. And then for jar number 2, I'm going back and I'm just popping in some ultramarine blue and just kind of giving the beans a little bit of depth and painting a neutral tint on the bottom of the jar for a shadow. So while I'm painting the jars, I'm trying to be aware of the light reflections on the jars. And if I do get paint in the reflection areas that we want to consider leaving the paper white, I just water it down and lift it off with either my brush or paper towel. For the 4th jar, I'm gonna wet it down and lay a layer of Davies gray on the beans, the black beans. And then for a second layer, while it's still wet, I put ultramarine blue down. And then for a 3rd layer, I'm also gonna add neutral tint because these beans are way dark and it's all wet on wet techniques. And I just want to let the watercolor do its thing on the paper and then let it dry at this point, and then I go back to jar number 2, just making a little bit of a dark color with burnt sienna and ultramarine blue and just doing the outlines of and shadow areas of the kidney beans. Time to let our progress dry. Today's going to be a busy day. We're going to be painting the kidney beans. We're going to go over in a thicker consistency and just darken the beans, darken the black beans with neutral tints, do some finer details of the crown and the shadows, and just comparing my painting to the reference and duplicating the colors that I see in the reference. By taking my time and working on these finer details, that's what makes the painting more realistic. By doing the lettering, filling in the darker details of the crown. With the dark, makes the lights lighter, makes the reflections reflect. So the darker you go, the whiters and the lights look lighter. I definitely find that doing the details on the jar very relaxing, and I'm getting in the groove of just looking at my reference and picking up paint and laying it down where I see shadows and just little points of interest, and it's soon going to be time to let it dry. We've walked away to take a break to let it dry. Now we're going to go back in and darken the darks again. Go over the beans. Go over the overlap from the third jar behind to show that it's shining through the fourth jar. We're just going to finesse the details. Go over the bottom of the jar, darken that. Go over the lid, make some darker points. The darker you take the darks that need to be to get them to their point, makes the realism pop of the jar. Now we're going to work on the details of jar number 2 while jar number 4 dries. We're just going to work on the overlap of jar 3 behind, showing the kidney bean color through the jar, and where the barley showing through on jar number 2. And we're just going to fine detail the darks, give more details to the crown, let the barley show through from jar 1 to jar 2. Oh, pop back over to number 4. I find this part very relaxing and very rewarding because you see your flat painting come to life. It takes on like a 3-dimensional look now. Sometimes when you're looking at your reference, you start to, over time, you start to notice more details. Like now I'm highlighting actually darkening the kidney beans because the jar is only a third full, so you can see the top of the beans and they're a little bit darker than the beans that are at the front of the jar, if that makes any sense. Now we're going to pop over to jar 1 because it kind of looks flat compared to jar number 2, 3, and 4. We're going to darken the details and put in more details with the crown and the barley. Oh, pop back over to jar 2 and 4. Now we're going to get serious with jar 1's details and darken the barley because it's not doing it. It looks flat to me. So I'm going to darken up the barley, put some of the reflection colors in the other jars because it does shine across, believe it or not, that I can see. We're going to darken that third cap one more time just to get it to its final place. Darken up the kidney beans. Just push that jar back further into the cupboard where it belongs. Darken the glass for jar 1 and where it overlaps. Add another watery consistency to the barley. Now it's looking more cohesive. Add another dark layer to the top of the kidney beans in jar 2 and another dark layer on the black beans in jar number 4. Now I'm really just scrutinizing my picture to the reference photo, and where I think I've missed, just darkening again, just making things pop. Because as it dries, watercolor tends to dry lighter. So when it goes on wet, it feels dark, but when it actually dries, it does dry a lot lighter. Now we're going to take the time and do the shadow around the jars. I'm a little cautious because I don't want it to flop. So this is very wet on wet technique. I wet it down, and then I'm just using a little mixture of ultramarine blue and neutral tint just to show where the jars are sitting on the shelf and where they reflect against the wall to the right, and then I'll do the back as well. There's just a wee bit of shadow from the angle that I took the photo with, so now I'm fine tuning the jars again, just darkening the darks and seeing anything that I missed. You might be tempted to stop now, but take your time and add a few more details because you will get there. Like I'm fixing up the lettering and fixing up the crown. And I'm even using, actually to be honest, I'm using a bit of designer's gouache, the permanent white, just to bring back some of the highlights that might have got drowned out. And I'm darkening the darks again because they're drying too light for my liking, so I just really want those reflections to pop. Next, I'm going to remove the masking tape that's framed the picture, and it just finishes the look of the painting when you peel that off. I love that. And now it's picture time, it's showcase time. I'm putting real beans on my picture with my paintbrush, and I'm taking a picture and I'm comparing it to my reference photo, and I'm pleased with the results. And I hope you are too. Thank you for watching.